Yagara. Our land is on the, our office is on the land of the Yagara and Turrbal people. Our members work on the lands of First Nations people across Queensland. We wish to pay our respects to their elders past and present and acknowledge the important role all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play in protecting, conserving and sustaining Queensland. I'm personally on Yagara country tonight, south side of Meanjin, Brisbane. And as you're joining us, I'd encourage you to share in the chat because we would like the chat to be quite interactive tonight. Share in the chat your name, what country you're from, what country you're on tonight, and perhaps what connections you might have with this topic tonight. So are you involved in a local wildcare group or a bush regen group or something like that? So feel free to pop that in the chat. The format tonight, we're trying to keep quite conversational and allow plenty of time for a Q&A as well. So I'm going to go through a session or two when I'm going to throw some questions at our guest speakers and then have a Q&A. If you do have a question already prepared that you want to ask, again, feel free to pop that in the chat. We will pluck those out as we go along. We might not get to all of them. We'll see how we go. If not, we'll endeavour to answer as many as we can after this evening in a Q&A and a follow-up afterwards. So just for a bit of scene setting, we do know that the story of koalas in Queensland is a pretty mixed and often quite a sad one, from the early colonial days where they were shot for pelts through to the dramatic crash of the population at the earlier this century. Our record of stewardship and conservation around this pretty remarkable, iconic species is pretty patched. But we also know that in recent years, we have managed to make some inroads. And there has been some amazing work done around research, the development of vaccines, and incredible hard work of volunteers right across SEQ and indeed Queensland, planting trees, undertaking surveys, and also caring for injured animals. And that is all helping us to turn things around. But we are at a real junction point at the moment, particularly in SEQ. As many of you know, we're facing a future of a growing population here in the southeast. It just so happens that lots of folks want to live in the same space where koalas also love to live and really do thrive here in the southeast, particularly the eastern lowlands. So we're really at a juncture as to where we go next and how we manage development and conservation over the next 10 to 20 years. And it's some really important decisions are going to have to be made, particularly in this, an election year, where we really need to raise up the voice of those who are voiceless, the creatures in our beautiful forests and in our wetlands, and the animals and ecosystems that we love so much. So welcome to everyone who's joining us. Feel free to pop your name in the chat and what country you're on, and also how you're connected to this issue. So we do have three fabulous speakers with us tonight, and I want to welcome them. We have Professor Darryl Jones, who is a long-standing Griffith lecturer, an urban ecologist, a nature lover, a broadcaster and author, including his most recent book, Getting to Know the Birds in Your Neighbourhood, a field guide. We might have to do a follow-up, Darryl, where we talk about birds, but for tonight we're focused on birds. Okay. We also have Shannon Mooney, who's an experienced landscape planner and mapping expert, and many of you will know from QCC's report that we released last year, which Shannon authored, Holding the Line, Reversing Biodiversity Decline. And finally, we have Sara Hicks, who's an advocate with Gecko Environment Council, which covers the Gold Coast and Hinterland region and has really been leading some of the work for the conservation movement and us folks around advocacy with government, particularly in the last 18 months. So thanks everyone for joining us. Let's start with the big picture. I just want to ask each of our guests to speak to the current situation of koalas in SEQ right now from their various perspectives. So maybe starting with you, Shannon. You've worked with Healthy Land and Water on mapping, particularly I think the koala arcs, and more recently you've looked at the SLATS data and the SEQ regional plan for us. From your perspective, what would you say is the current state of koala habitat sort of across the landscape of SEQ.
Yeah, thanks, Jen, and hi to everyone. Look, I guess when we identified the koala arcs, we identified areas of high koala significance. So we're fortunate in South East Queensland that we still have koalas in one of the fastest growing regions in the nation. These areas had high connectivity, koala habitat. They were large tracts of forest. But we know from the work we did with the SEQ regional plan, shaping SEQ, that we're at that critical biodiversity threshold. We've got 35% of our remnant forests left in the region. 31% is koala habitat. So we've got 31% of South East Queensland suitable for koalas. So there's a bit of work to do, but they're holding on. Nature's resilient, and that's good. With the new koala mapping, we've got the best vegetation mapping in Australia. Again, I'm in Queensland, and I guess that has informed the latest koala habitat mapping, version 4. Overall, we've seen a decrease in koala habitat, and some of that's because of methodology changes. But what we have observed since, I guess, the last round of shaping SEQ before it got updated and re-released end of the year, we have lost, or there's been disturbance to up to 3,000 hectares, 1,500 to 3,000 hectares. So yeah, they're holding on, but we've got to do more, and I think now's the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Thanks, Shannon. And Sara, how about over to you? You've been working at a kind of a policy level. What and I've seen you put a lot of hard questions to folks in government in recent months. Can you paint a picture for us about what is going on and sort of with the current policy, with what's happening at a government level? Because we've heard from Shannon about where habitat's at. So do you want to just speak to that a bit?
I think Sarah's on mute. Can we unmute?
There we go. Thanks, Jen. It's like child lock on mute. Yeah, so I'm not a koala expert. I'm honoured to be joining this panel, and I'm much more of a journalist and work in the advocacy space, and have the privilege in that role of working really closely with people with that local knowledge and experience and huge care. And many of you are in the room tonight. It's lovely to see the familiar faces. So indulge me for a moment just to take us on a quick backward look at how we've come to where we are in terms of the regs review and our policy at the moment. So the current regulations for clearing of mapped koala habitat in SEQ were introduced by the Queensland Government in 2020. And essentially these rules intended to increase planning controls and protect high quality koala habitat. It's not, they're not designed to protect all vegetation and all identified areas where koalas are. But what it did was signal by the Queensland Government a really clear recognition that koalas are under significant pressure, particularly from habitat loss as a key threatening process, as well as the ongoing impacts of climate change that we're seeing increasing, which is changing the habitat suitability, particularly to the west of our region, and things like fire, dog attack, vehicle strikes and disease. And cumulatively, these impacts on koalas, as Shannon said, are just raising the stakes to a point where we've got urban and peri-urban koala populations that are just managing to persist, as we all know. Community was largely actually exempt from consultation for those 2020 regs. And so what happened last year was the government did a post-implementation review. The government didn't want to trigger panic clearing, so there was good reason for that. But this review has engaged a lot of us across the region, and many of us would have made submissions. The independent reviewer, GHD, actually acknowledged that there were a lot of limitations in that process, really limited scope, incomplete data set, and really limited time frame. So it wasn't great information that we were basing feedback on to begin with. But as Shannon mentioned, the koala habitat mapping and methodology really underpins those rules and regulations intended to protect koala habitat. That's also been going through various iterations. So at the stage we're in now, we understand that the post-implementation review, or PIR as we've come to know it, is currently with Cabinet, which means we can expect something public very soon and another round of consultation. Just a couple of quick points here is that DESI, so the Department of Environment, Science and Innovation, as it's now known, have conceded the strength of the regulations are more in supporting Western SEQ koala habitat rather than in our urban areas. They're not as effective for protecting those more fragmented populations. And some regulatory loopholes were being taken advantage of, which we're pretty sure we're getting some indications from government that some of those stacked and gamed exemptions may be reduced through this PIR process. But it's really important for us to remember that when we come into the consultation phase of this, community voice is really going to matter in terms of backing up any sort of policy reform that improves these regs, and worth remembering that we're not the only sector who's lobbying government on that.
Thanks, Sarah. So we've seen a decline. I think, is it fair to say that the regs, when they did come in, have slowed the clearing of habitat, particularly in SEQ, but they haven't arrested it as such? I think that's...
Well, I think Shannon's got the expertise on this, having done his own analysis, but I would agree generally with that statement. Yep. But I mean, I guess one of the points is that in the overarching koala conservation strategy, the Queensland government set a target to reduce koala injury and mortality by 25% at key hotspots by 2025. I think many of us here would struggle to imagine that being achieved, although there may be some areas like the ARCs and like koala priority areas that were identified through mapping and given some more protections where those koala populations, may have seen some improvements for sure.
And so it's an important period coming up where the PIR report will be released soon, and there'll be an opportunity for folks to get involved in advocacy and consultation around that. Thanks so much, Sarah. And so Darryl, over to you. We've had a bit of the landscape view. Now, you've been researching and working with koalas and many other species over the last many years. What about from an urban ecology perspective? What have you seen change over the years, and what's your take on the current situation?
Yeah, thanks, Jan, and good to see you other guys. So many people interested in this topic. Yeah, I should say I'm coming to you from Wiradjuri country, which is down in southern New South Wales, the largest nation in the country. And I usually live in Brisbane most of the time, and have lived there for 25 years and studying population. So my perspective as an urban ecologist on population. So it was mentioned that one of the things that people were worried about was car strikes. So our engagement with my research group is all about finding decent and good populations of koalas that were in the vicinity of dangerous roads, and that was basically state roads, and having a really good look at those over a series of years. And in that process, we saw declines in almost all of them. In a short period of time, the car, basically roadkill was knocking off huge numbers of them. Now that has declined, but in some cases it's declined because the population has pretty much vanished. But in other places, there's also signs that the animals have learned how to deal with traffic, and that's a real thing. So they instead of becoming really mobile at the beginning of their day, which is early evening, there are populations of koalas now which absolutely don't cross roads until it's the middle of the night, 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, when they have learned the hard way but that's when there's less traffic. But overall, we've seen population decline all over the place. But to go back to Shannon's point from the landscape perspective, and this is absolutely crucial, the only reason that Queensland, that Brisbane and South East Queensland itself remains the most biodiverse part of Australia is because of the large tracts of original land that is still here. That's the only reason we've got so much biodiversity. So many species of wildlife live close to where all the people live, including koalas. So to reiterate one other point that was made, we are so lucky to have koalas living right around us. It's now up to us and the decision makers to take that seriously and learn how the best way we can coexist. We've got to coexist with koalas because koalas they don't know what roads are, they don't know what people are, they don't necessarily know what backyards are. They don't distinguish between that and the landscape that they normally live in. They would just cross the landscape as best they can. But they're always going to run into things that are risky, like traffic and dogs and all that sort of stuff. I'll talk about it later on when we get the chance, but there are ways that we can assist them to do that safely. So it's a mixed bag. It's mostly a bad view. It's mostly looking bad, but there are so many things we can do if we make decisions right now. And I just want to make one last point in this introductory part. It is the crucial thing that all politicians worry about the most influential version of an influence for politicians, for decision makers, is really activated, informed community groups. Those are the people that make the decision, make the difference. Those people that come out and say, we aren't standing it for anymore. We want this to change, and listen to us because we're the voters of the place. So I just want to reiterate that for everybody in the audience listening. You aren't alone. If you can join a group and make a really big difference.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Darryl. That's kind of set a bit of a picture for us. So if that's kind of what we're dealing with, we've got the very urban centres that are kind of where there's like a lot of sort of, as you mentioned, Sarah, and a lot of that work around conservation is really focused on more the western regions where there's the larger tracts of land. So we've got national parks, we've got some protected areas, then we've got our koalas who are kind of, sustaining into the urban centres as well that we're very lucky to have. So it's a real mixed bag in terms of populations and health and how they're surviving and adapting. That really strikes me. I don't think I've ever really considered just how different the koala experience is from one end of even SEQ to the other, and how we have to really adapt our strategies around that. But just like turning to the work that needs to be done and what is possible and what we could be pushing for. Shannon, from a landscape view, what are the key things you would see, like from a landscape ecology perspective or landscape planning perspective? What would be the critical things that you think we have to do next and we can push our governments to do now?
Yeah, I guess picking up on what Darryl and Sarah and even yourself mentioned, Jen, I guess we live in the coastal lowlands of SEQ because of proximity to all the resources that we love, home, recreation, beaches, and they are some of the most productive lands for all our wildlife. And I guess that's why we probably keep seeing koalas pop up at White's Hill and in these areas. That's just where they've always been and trying to traverse the landscape. But I guess a good thing that we're seeing probably in the last 4 years is we're seeing multi-millions of investment coming for koalas. And sometimes we think, geez, there's other species that could also do with that support. But, as conservationists, we'll definitely take the koala funds. And they're our iconic species. They're very dear to the nation. And I guess they're going to address not only where the koala habitat is and hopefully grow it, improve it, but also address some of the threats. And we've got plenty of those. We've mentioned the roads and fire and dogs. We've got all these wonderful tools, koala art mapping. We're working on koala Bayesian networks. We've got the best koala habitat mapping. This will guide this investment. And we're also looking at investigating koala fauna crossing hotspots. Desi's doing that work. So hopefully we'll start to see more fauna crossings pop up. And we know from Darryl's research, they work. and we just haven't seen enough of them this side of the border. You know, often when you travel south, the first thing you see is some beautiful land bridges, you know, fauna crossings. Probably also pick up on some of the First Nations, you know, I guess getting involved in koala conservation, and I saw it there with the best practice on Minjerribah, North Straddie, looking at fauna presence before we do fire management, you know, and sort of the swamp over there, you know, there was 40 koalas in that area. So in the past, we probably would have done a cool burn, but we just didn't know what was in there. So that First Nation led, and that's, you know, led by Quandamooka, Yullaburraby Aboriginal Corporation. So good to see more of that, to look at, well, how do we manage the challenge, these issues better? And just the strongholds, we've got koala strongholds, and they keep popping up across SEQ. You know, we recently heard about one up there on the boundary up at Gympie. And as Darryl said, the community are more engaged than ever. So there's plenty of positives out there.
And so from like, you know, with the mapping that you've done, you mentioned that koala habitat's down to about 31%, I think you said. What do we need to be aiming for at a regional level, realistically, to have healthy, thriving koalas? And is it possible from a mapping perspective to look at our landscape and find those areas that we could restore?
Well, I think Brisbane had the target, you know, they had a canopy cover target of 40%. And I think the literature and the science also says 40% forest cover is good for biodiversity. Once we go below 30, food webs and everything starts to break down. So I think our target is 40%. And I think we can do it. And it is looking at how we connect those cores across the landscape, with those highly fragmented, highly valued nodes, forest nodes.
Okay. Thanks, Shannon. What about in the urban environment then? You know, like you've mentioned it a little bit. I wonder, because Darryl, this has been an area that you've really worked on, and I've heard such different things about, you know, hearing about the adaptive capacity of koalas. It's not a species that I've really thought of as being adaptive in the same way we see birds getting into the rubbish bins and, you know, finding ways to break into homes like possums do to get their food sources, right? But you know, you've sort of spoken a little bit about the adaptive capacity of koalas. Can you speak a bit more around, you know, like, can we really redesign our neighborhoods, and how do we do infrastructure better? What could it look like to actually help these urban populations in particular?
Yeah, great question there, Amy. Yeah, we've lucked out with this stuff, because I became part of it. Being an urban ecologist is inevitably being a road ecologist as well. So that's probably where I've done most of my research, all looking at how can we overcome the absolute enormous impact of dividing up the landscape by road. So wherever you are, whatever your species you are, if you go in any direction, you will eventually come across a road. If it's a little road and it's the middle of the night, you might be able to get across safely, but mostly those roads will be, you know, brick walls. You can't go anywhere. Yet we want the animals to move through the landscape, and especially the koalas. They must disperse. Young animals must move away from home. Young males looking for mates must move across the landscape. Mothers with joeys need to look for food for their animals. All that. So we want mobility, and yet in every direction they go, they will find something that stops them, usually in the form of a road. So one of the challenges of road ecology that exists is how can we overcome that barrier effect, the barrier effect of road. And so starting really early on, I got invited to be part of the team of people that looked at one crossing over Compton Road, which was a 2-lane road that went up to 4 lanes. And that was absolutely experimental. I knew nothing about it. I was very skeptical whether it worked. It worked like a dream. Like with 6 months, we had 46 individual animals using those structures every single night, and it was unbelievable. I mean, and ever since then, everything I've been doing has been looking at different sorts of the suitability of different sorts of crossing structures, and which animals use them and which ones won't. Now, koalas aren't very good at using, you know, rope ladders. There's rope ladders, canopy bridges also called, crossing roads all over the place these days, but they're too flimsy and unstable for koalas to use them. But koalas will use, to our great surprise, koalas will use a very easy to install ledge underneath roads. Now, one of the things about a wet place like South East Queensland is there are large scale culverts all over the place. And so it was one of the early experiments that was tried. And I was pretty skeptical about this. I got into big trouble for saying, look, I'm not sure that koalas are smart enough to do this. You know, I think the words I used were stoned on eucalyptus oil most of the time, and got into big trouble because I was totally wrong. They put in ledges, so a ledge above where the water line would be, but under the road, not over the road, and just a simple thing that's attached to the side of the concrete wall. And it's easy to use. Anyone could, in any council can put them in. There's a dozen different designs now, and they work like a dream as long as you put a fence at the top. So you've got to exclude the animals from getting onto the road. If they hit a fence and think, oh, I just crossed here last year, but I can't now. I'll go looking for a way. Oh, here's a way under the road. And those things have been incredibly successful. And so there's no reason anywhere that councils, anywhere where there are koalas, can't put in many more of these structures. And they have made an enormous difference in South East Queensland, especially in the zone between Brisbane City Council and Redlands City Council. In that area there are many, many underpasses. You don't know about them because they're just ledges underneath the roads where the culverts are. But they have made an enormous difference to the ability for animals to cross the landscape. And I just use that as an example of an engineering example of how this can be done in an easy way. And so that's established. There's no excuses anymore. It was possible once to say that the road engineers or the councils would say, yeah, Compton Road might be good. It works really well, but they're too expensive. Sure. But now we've got a really cheap alternative to that is specially designed for koalas, and the koalas will use it really well. So that's just one example of a hopeful sign, and that can be rolled out anywhere really much.
And I'm assuming it has a whole bunch of other species would have the benefit of that infrastructure.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, 11 different species use those things regularly now, you know, because we've got cameras on all of them to see what's going on. Koalas are just one of the species that use them. You know, even wallabies are using them. I had the most amazing thing was what they call a train of echidnas, a female and about 7 males following her, just crossing. The whole thing was looking fantastic.
So it is possible to redesign our neighbourhoods to accommodate the animals and
we've proved it endlessly in South East Queensland. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think you've mentioned before too that koalas, to me, prize is that koalas can actually find their feed trees in a quite higgledy-piggledy landscape. It doesn't necessarily have to be, which was a bit of a surprise to me.
Well, another thing that maybe people don't realise is that Brisbane, you know, the Greater Brisbane area, which includes Redlands, has got the only 2 specially designed hard surface koala crossings, a structure designed specifically for koalas to cross the road. One of them is on the road going to whatever the main road, I've forgotten now. What's it called? Anyway, the main road between Brisbane and Caloundra, and Bribie Island I'm sorry, in the wrong place. The main road between Brisbane and the Redlands, anyway, that one there. There's a koala specific crossing structure. There's a new one over Boundary Road where Shannon mentioned earlier, between Whites Hill and the suburbs on either side. And that's what you're getting at there, because the koalas on that side in that area seem to know ancient, you know, like well-established traditional food trees that are really good now in people's backyards. So, but they will nonetheless traverse the road and cross all those backyards with dogs and things in order to get to those really important feed trees. So it's almost like there's a cultural memory of where those really fantastically important for them, and we don't exactly know why, maybe nutritionally, why they needed to get to them. And so that's a memory for leading to the predictable movements of koalas in certain places. And this is in inner Brisbane, you know, right in the middle of Brisbane. So that, you know, and that's the sort of knowledge that we need to acquire and give credit where credit is due. Brisbane City Council have taken this on board really, really well. and they've done some great work along Boundary Road there near the Whites Hill Recreation Reserve.
Oh, thanks. Oh, that's really interesting. I could keep asking questions, but I know a lot of folks want to ask them as well. Do you want to, Sarah, go for it?
Yeah, I'd just love to add a little bit to this round, Jen, and do a little zoom out and zoom in as well, because we've got, I mentioned talking about the rules and regs that are under review, but of course we've got the Koala Conservation Strategy and SEQ. And this basically works as a recovery plan in that kind of space in South East Queensland. And under that come a whole range of different kinds of actions that we've already been touching on tonight, from development of chlamydia vaccine, working with wildlife hospitals, working on some threat mitigation actions, although perhaps a little bit limited again in those urban areas, communication and education in the community, restoration in our koala arcs in these sort of islands out west, things. And of course, they're trying to, in terms of that koala conservation strategy, it's really a response to a range of threats. But in addition, I also want to just highlight the work of, as you did in the beginning, Jen, of our bush care groups and land care groups, of the wildlife rescue sector, because these are the frontline groups who are also making a difference on the ground. And there is intention, because the Koala Conservation Strategy is 2020 to 2025. We've been asking DESI what their future plans are, and there is an intention to evolve the conservation strategy. And there is funding as well that's going to, we're told, expand and improve on the strategy. But there are some... And there's many projects being rolled out that work in that. There's a heavy reliance on partnerships, and that's a great thing, really, because we're talking about government working closely with community, with universities, with Healthy Land and Water, and a whole range of groups to deliver these projects on the ground. But what we're seeing some gaps around, particularly of what Shannon's touched on there, is around restoration. I would suggest there's a real restoration gap. And if we need to increase the habitat in our landscape by another 10%, we've got to do restoration. We've got to look at that strategically in a landscape scale. We've got to look at that across jurisdictions. So we've got state government working with local government on land acquisitions. And what we really need to support all of that is information and research. We need the intimate knowledge, like Darryl was talking about our local koala populations. And quite often it's our local councils who are best placed for those sorts of studies and research in combination with state and other community groups. So one of the things we advocate for is more support from state towards those efforts and that sort of knowledge, so that we know how to make those strategic decisions. We really need to closely analyse where we need vegetation and where scenarios of change are going to continue to impact koalas with urban growth and with climate change affecting habitat suitability. I'm sure that it is possible to look at the specific threats to koala populations in their local areas and design conservation measures for those populations. Another point is we really need to recognise the role of urban koalas, rather than put our hands up and say these populations are just in the too hard basket to protect and conserve, which unfortunately I don't think anyone wants to see koalas go that way, but it is really complex and challenging. The issue there is we've got this climate change squeeze from the west and a sea change squeeze from the east. And our urban koala populations may well actually be the ones best placed to persist into the future in terms of future changing climate. And that's going to call for really, really big community support, because we need houses, and we need places for our wildlife to live at the same time. And so this brings into focus that biodiversity crisis that's playing out right here where we live. And the two don't need to be pitched against each other. Really, in my personal view, this is around educating our MPs and representatives to help them envision what green neighbourhoods and infrastructure look like, and why they matter as a vital part of our whole community needs, and for many, many reasons. The other couple of things really quickly we need is formal and proper support for our wildlife rescue sector. Now, when we're talking about the cumulative impacts of state infrastructure projects, of development and things like that, these are the people in our community who are frontline and doing the care and the hard yards and up all night looking after these individuals. But we're seeing, again, a gap in terms of formal agreements with government and appropriate funding that's commensurate with the sorts of projects that are going on. And lastly, expanding the koala conservation strategy beyond SEQ is also vital. So I'm pretty sure we've got some people from outside the region who aren't covered by these rules and regs and the conservation strategy at the moment. DESI are currently mapping the northern part of the SEQ bioregion to bring that in, but it could take another 2 or 3 years before the koala conservation strategy expands beyond that. That's too long. We really urgently need interim measures for koalas, and we need a statewide koala kind of recovery project.
Thanks, Sara. Yeah, go for it, Shannon.
There's a few comments there in the chat around urban planning, and I guess those coastal lowlands, they're our productive areas, and reflecting on shaping SEQ, I guess how it was presented to us is that it provides certainty for urban development, industrial development, and I think what we need in that certainty also is, where's our public green space that sort of weaves through that urban matrix, and then we'd have a chance, I guess, at restoring and connecting up. And a lot of the areas that are left are on our waterways. And we know that under, the current climate change scenarios, that these areas are becoming more vulnerable to flooding, erosion. So I think we can restore those areas. It's a no-brainer. And also there's multiple benefits in doing that. Improved water quality, improved habitat, cooling the temperature down in these microclimates. There's also mention on the peri-urban. So look just outside the urban matrix. We call this urban-rural interface, the peri-urban zone. I think Professor Darryl Jones first mentioned it many years ago. What we're seeing with some of the clearing disturbance of koala habitat is in that zone. Now, we don't know what that's for. Sometimes it's that speculator, getting it ready for, more growth, more urban expansion. But it used to be a green belt around a lot of our cities, and it is probably where the habitat's being pushed out to, and our species. So there is hope in that interface zone. But again, there's conflicting land use in that area.
Yeah. And that's certainly where we've got to really put a stop to greenfields development, because they've wreaked so much destruction on habitat in the last few years, acknowledging that we are in a housing crisis for folks as well, and that we have to build those houses, but we can do it by going up, not out. Thanks. That's a lot. My brain's just trying to compute that, but it's a good pickup, Sara. There's been a few comments in the chat, so if you do have questions now, we'll have some time for Q&A. Firstly, folks were talking about outside of SEQ, so I'll come to that in a second. But Darryl, with urban design, we've just had local council elections, right? In some cases, we've got new mayors, we've got new councillors. It's a brilliant opportunity for folks to go in and say, hey, we care about our koala habitat. Here's 10 things you could do straight away to help make our urban environment more climate resilient and safer for our iconic species. Is that material there, and can we help pull that together for folks and maybe give them the tools they need?
it is. It just needs a little bit more intelligent deciphering so that anybody can understand them, even politicians. But I just want to bring up one little extremely important counter to the sort of general negativity here. And that is, I worked for 30-something years at Griffith University in the middle of Toohey Forest, and I can tell you absolutely without any doubt at all, there were no koalas in Toohey Forest when I lived there, when I worked there. And then about 15 years ago, wildlife carers decided that was a great place. It was a perfect koala habitat, but didn't have any koalas, and they put them in, and these were chlamydia-free, healthy koalas that had been saved from other places. And now we have 48 plus koalas in Toohey Forest, from none to 48. And now we've got to the stage where we always wondered about how long it would take. It took less time than we wondered, when it's now full. And so there's, in every direction now, young male koalas are trying to disperse. They're meeting the roads and all that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to show you, it's both incredibly dynamic. This was a population of healthy koalas that came out of nowhere in the middle of Brisbane, and can be done. We now need to bite the bullet and say, this is what we want. This is coexistence with koalas. And we need to get it right away from the people live in one place and wildlife lives somewhere else. The only way we're going to survive this whole crisis that's coming upon us is to realise that we are part of nature, and that's how we should live. We should drive it as though we're part of nature. We should build our buildings as though we're part of nature. We should design everything because we are part of nature, and if nature doesn't exist, we won't exist. So just to make a big, crazy philosophical statement, this is how we're going to get through the crises, by working together with each other, but also with our fellow creatures on this planet, because that's the only way we're going to survive.
Yeah, it's a great point that the green space is adding to our own climate resilience as much as it is creating that refugia for the animals. And I love that idea of the coexistence. That should be our leading communication to our new local councillors. How do we coexist? And how
you may not hear about it, but this is now a major international movement now, the redesigning of urban areas for both biodiversity and humans, because humans need the green space just as much as the animals. For our own mental and physical well-being, we need nature to just walk through, because the evidence is now unequivocal. Without green space, we are less healthy and less stable, and so we need the wildlife and the wild places as much as the animals do.
Thanks, Darryl. And so the short answer to that is we'll send out some resources. We'll extract some knowledge from Darryl's brain. Someone can try and simplify it. So
not just me, there's plenty of other people out there.
And plenty of others. And I even saw that some folks were sharing some stuff in the chat. So we'll pull some of that together in the next few days and share that with people. Because one action that I didn't have on my call to action at the end of tonight, but people can take right now, is actually to hit up your local councillors who've just been elected while they're fresh, while they're open to ideas and they're sensitive to community before they become too rusted in there and jaded. Get in there and talk to them about the need for coexistence.
And you don't have to convince anybody that koalas are cool. I mean, that's already, that's why we're all here.
Yeah, that's it. So we have a couple of questions. Crystal, koala colonies west, north and south of Toowoomba are currently not recognised and protected under the SEQ koala protection strategy. Hence, also missing out on funding. How can those colonies be included in protection strategies? Do you want to touch on that? I know you've touched on it a little bit more, already, Sarah. Do you want to speak to that a bit more?
Oh, well, thanks for the question, Crystal. I don't have a heap of detailed info for you, except that this Queensland government do have a lot of projects that are running outside of SEQ as well, as part of their partnership with the Commonwealth on the National Recovery Plan. So most likely this is a great opportunity to be able to take to your local member, and with that, telling the stories of why this really matters to you, any sort of examples and case studies of what's going on the ground, and the changes that you'd really like to see, potentially the groups who could get involved, that sort of thing, that I really, really encourage yourself and anyone, if you haven't already, to take up that conversation with your local representatives.
Yep. And when the strategy review report comes out soon, that'll be another opportunity during that consultation period to kick this issue again, push it along and try and.
Yeah, that's right, Jen. And look, I guess there's a bunch of us from outside of SEQ. I work with colleagues from around Queensland who are really strongly advocating for interim measures for koalas beyond SEQ. And if there are people particularly interested in joining us along the way, we welcome that. West of Toowoomba, you've got Darling Downs Environment Council, who are colleagues of ours. So there's lots of people we can sort of plug in together. And I think that's part of what I'm hearing underlying this, is this message of coming together to share knowledge and resourcing and unite as a voice for koala protections that don't not only care for koalas, but for people and so many of our threatened species and other native animals as well.
Thanks. From an urban planning perspective, this is a question from Kimberly. Could a targeted strategy be by focusing on the peri-urban landscape to improve habitat fragmentation, i.e. looking at how koalas and other species move through those spaces safely and what landowners can do to facilitate safe passage? Darryl or
I think Shannon's probably better to answer that one.
Yeah, I think that was picking up on that peri-urban issue, but I guess one of the questions we did put to Desi recently with the koala habitat mapping is, how do we look at that connectivity factor? At the moment, we've mapped all koala habitat and we need to protect all of it. But yeah, how do we, I guess we haven't gone down a prioritisation path of where are those corridors and how connected the habitat is. The Bayesian network that we're working on with QUT and Mirror Analytics, Healthy Land and Water, that's, I guess that's looking at how connected, and it comes up with a koala score. So the more values and the less threats, obviously, the higher the score it gets. So
that's the new piece of technology you've been a bit involved in, Shannon? Just to, because when you say Bayesian network, my brain just like doesn't quite. So it's a new technology that Healthy Land and Water, and you've been involved a bit in that.
Yeah, it's probably new, but it has been around for a while, I think. And certainly we sort of picked it up from some of the work that New South Wales were doing with koalas. So I guess it's looking at, I guess, the variables and the uncertainty in data to come up with what are the best ways to reduce the threats and improve the values, basically. So it's another decision support tool. And there's certainly some smarter people than me working on it to see it through. But again, yeah, I think there's hope there, but certainly the corridors and connectivity needs probably to be explored, maybe in the next koala strategy.
So a key issue that we really need to pick up as a sector, as conservationists, is the connectivity issue, is who's mapping it, who's prioritising it, because it's a bit of a gap at the moment. Let me just see, I just had one in front of me. That was on peri-urban. Is it feasible to encourage or subsidise the community? This might be one for you, Darryl, in known koala habitat zones to plant koala feed trees and to introduce regulations around dogs in those areas. So when it comes to, say, particularly those urban areas, can we improve habitat by planting more trees? Is that part of the equation?
It will be part of the equation, absolutely. More likely planting the trees on non-private land, or at least not on backyards. You know, in a sense, we don't want the koalas to be moving through backyards that are not suitable for them. But there are places, and I know this in the Ipswich area. There are places where 6 neighbours have all got together and they've said, we're going to live as though the koalas and other animals are part of the world we live in. And so they've taken down fences. They've put up they've put their fences with big gaps underneath so the animals can get through. And they've planted koala feed trees in that area, as well as many other types of plants that just encourage biodiversity in general. And that's a kind of a micro version of what would be fantastic to be across the board. But yes, we can absolutely put in food trees, no doubt about it. But it takes a while. I mean, they don't just instantly grow, and the koala, they don't support a koala's weight until they're 20 years old or something. So that can still be done. But working with the dog management is absolutely crucial, but it's really tricky. People it's one of those blind spots. Everyone else should keep their dog inside except mine. Like it's the same sort of thing that we have with domestic cats. Needs to be managed carefully. It can be done. It's been done in all sorts of places around the world, but it's just a difficult social thing. But it needs to be done because it's not the dog's fault. The dogs are just doing what they normally do. A mammal turning up in their territory could be potentially a threat. They don't understand that it's a koala that people really like, and so it's not the dog's fault, but the responsibility lies with the people. So a few challenges there, but it can be done.
I love that idea of neighbours getting together and making all their backyards koala friendly. That's cool.
There's a really successful one in Mount Gravatt area, not for koalas, but for butterflies. And so a whole range, 20 people with backyards that all align, have all agreed to put in specific types of plants, bushes primarily, that attract butterflies, especially the iconic kind of butterflies. And those butterflies can now cross 20 backyards from one bit of forest to the next bit of forest. And that's so good and so exciting for the people who live in those places. Brilliant.
Beautiful.
It's pollinator network, they're called. Yeah.
Oh, yep. I've been trying to grow my own bee flowers. Unfortunately, bush turkeys had other opinions on my native bee flowers. In terms of, say that, Darryl, we had another question: as food supply is integral to habitat, can we integrate human food supply into our more than human ecology?
I think that's part of the kind of big story about how we can have less barriers between where humans live and what the humans do and where the animals live and what the animals do. You can do that without a doubt. You have to be very tolerant that you're going to lose some of your fruit because the growing fruit and the animals will like the fruit. And the flying foxes and the possums will absolutely say thank you very much. But it can be done, or you can just say, I'm growing the fruit, but it's all for you guys. That's fine. Just go for it. I'll buy mine from Coles. That eventually happens to be a thing. But it's just part of this whole. I think we need a completely new way of thinking about how we live, and that's got to be not just for humans. We've got to include the whole of the biodiversity that we are part of. That's just beyond important. It's absolutely critical.
I'd love to add there, Jen, that if we can do this well for koalas, we've got an incredible opportunity for all our other species. And just like Darryl's saying, and in a very pragmatic sense, what that can look like is if the mapping methodology that's being designed and developed by incredible expertise from the Department of Environment, from universities, that could quite easily be then applied to species like greater gliders. It just needs some different inputs in terms of what their particular needs and threats and things like that are in the landscape. And so we're actually on a really exciting cusp. We are leading a lot, but unfortunately it's just also at the same time of this real urgency. And so the urgency, in my view as an advocate, really needs to drive us and motivate us as communities to go out and share the stories about why this is so important to us, why we want to, develop livable cities that are, as Darryl's been describing in this beautiful visual for us tonight, and also how we can support our traditional owners in their deep, intimate knowledge of caring for country, caring for Borrowby, our koalas, fire management, all of those sorts of things. We could do more in that space of really, really listening and supporting and advocating in that way. There's a few other real little easy individual kinds of things that we can do in our community, like in addition to planting natives. And there are fantastic dog training courses that you can do for avoiding wildlife. There's koala-friendly design and fencing, as we've talked about. You can also take training to learn how to spot and find koalas and then report them on the Q Wildlife app or to your local government. And that data is super essential to inform, again, all of this sort of thinking and strategizing around how we can do this better for koalas everywhere.
Yeah, and in the chat, a few folks have picked up on your comment about 20-year-old trees. I think Rebecca said she's found an Ipswich koalas in trees less than 10 years old, and in one case, a 1-year-old tree. That is a
Whoa.
That's a pretty adaptive koala right there. As long as they're nearby large shelter trees, so that they can get to them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have underestimated the speed at which a Queensland trees can grow, obviously.
Yes, I do recall the image of that koala that got into the tree seed. I got it sent from a friend in the UK because it made it to BBC News before it made it locally, because we're like, oh, just another koala story. And it was all over the English news about this koala in a nursery.
Yep.
In the saplings. The other sort of questions coming through, I think that's a really great point you're making about community can do a lot. As someone put in the chat, Anna Bly said that no koala habitat would be lost, and look where we are now. So community can and have stepped up in a big way, and we can continue to do that. So we're approaching about 7:30. We said we would only go for an hour and 15 minutes. So I'm wondering if the three of you each want to kind of just have a think about like what's your final kind of comment or that you would make or thought that you want to leave folks with tonight. And we won't close off right there. We'll talk a little bit about what comes next. So just hold on for a minute or two. But I might throw to you, Shannon, first. What, given our conversations tonight, what are your kind of
I think, I know we've set ourselves at that, a target of 40% cover. I guess reflecting that true ecosystem restoration is very hard and it is very costly, and it can take time. And once we lose those old growth forests, I'm never going to see them again because they take 300 to 400 years to grow. So I guess we really need to protect the koala habitat that we've got. That's number one. We need to restore the landscape too, but we're sort of, I guess, all the goodwill that we're doing, we're still, it's almost being suppressed by the other side of town to some degree. So as a take-home message, let's protect and manage what we've got in different ways.
Thanks, Shannon. Sarah, what about you?
I feel very much the same way as Shannon about this. One of the key questions we hold is just how can we strategically restore and maintain habitat and connectivity and support that bioregional movement of koalas, particularly on the Gold Coast through that urban and peri-urban landscape, but then also looking to how can we ensure our conservation measures reach beyond SEQ. And as we know, like urban growth isn't limited to here. We're seeing rapid development all the way along the coastline. And in fact, koalas are found all the way up through to the Atherton Tablelands. It's quite amazing where they actually live in Queensland. So that, and I think just again, reiterating the importance of and not underestimating the power and importance of talking about this in our community and with our local representatives. A lot of people may know less or be really ready to engage in a conversation like this, more so than you think. Like Darryl said, they are cute and not one to sort of disagree with our amazing koalas, but remember that when you do, you're speaking on behalf of not only koalas, but biodiversity for our whole region.
Thanks, Sarah. Darryl.
Yeah, no question whatsoever. Number one priority is to keep what we've got. We can't lose any more. It's absolutely crucial. That's the fundamental one. The other one is we are very lucky. We still currently at the moment, we live with koalas. There's koalas all around us in South East Queensland. What a privilege that is. Let's take that privilege and understand it and value it, and therefore do what's required next in terms of preserving them, minimizing the risk to them, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, it's taking that seriously. It's realizing how lucky we are compared to anywhere else around, that we can currently see koalas all around us. That's not going to last unless we change the way we do things. And so it's, you know, just this is the time to make that decision right now.
Yeah. And that's a great note to finish on, because I will say, like, in terms of, say, a next step or a call to action for this evening, as Sarah's mentioned, the koala conservation strategy post-implementation review is underway. Once that report is out, we will be keen to gather together as a sector, as conservationists in the various parts of SEQ, to really look closely at that and to work together as QCC, as Gecko, the other regional conservation councils and other conservation groups out there, to look at where does it get to and what more needs to be done. I think we've had a lot of great ideas tonight. So we'll really look forward to kind of hosting and gathering together around that and plotting out what our next steps can be. In the interim, we will also take the wonderful resources and things that folks have shared tonight and anything else that the speakers want to provide, and we'll distribute that to everyone, perhaps with a little guide about, a little comms guide for you about, here's a couple of ways you could approach your local council in the short term to inform them about the issues and ask them to take action. Part of that could be to take Shannon's report from last year, Holding the Line, which we can also send the link out to. And in terms of that, I might also just hand over to my colleague, Hayley. We will send out that as a follow-up and a short survey, but Hayley is going to speak a little bit to one other action that you could take quite soon.
Great, thanks, Jen. Yeah, I just wanted to jump in to mention another campaign that we have going at the moment. We've just launched it. It's called Protect Beautiful Queensland, and it's very exciting. It's all about habitat protection. As we heard, that's the #1 thing that we need to do. So we're campaigning to double Queensland's protected areas by 2030 through national parks, Indigenous protected areas, private protected areas. And this April, we're holding a week of action, which is an opportunity to make sure our politicians know Queenslanders are expecting them to prioritise nature. We know that 77% of people support national parks through some recent polling. But what we need is really people out there actively supporting national parks. So demonstrating to their communities, to the politicians, that you care about protecting habitat. As we've heard multiple times today, it's that community action is really what makes the difference. So that week of action, it can be pretty simple. So basically what we're just asking people to do is head out into their favorite patch of nature, take a photo of themselves with a sign that says Protect Beautiful Queensland, because then you can fill in the gaps. So tell us why you want to protect beautiful Queensland and share that with your MP, with us, and with your networks. And if you want to have more impact, it's also an opportunity to organise events. It might just be bringing your family and friends together, or it might be your community. Maybe it's an event at your local habitat that you want to protect. As an opportunity to sort of further bring attention to those issues. And yeah, so, and the idea of those events is bringing more people together to do that digital action and further highlighting why we need to protect beautiful Queensland. So there's a link in the chat for you to all sign up to. Please do. And through the signing up, you'll receive further information about what that week is all about. And I'll also share in the chat. Also shared in the chat is the link to the campaign as well, campaign website too.
Really important piece of the puzzle, expanding our protected areas. Thanks so much, Hayley, and thank you all. Thanks, Darryl, Shannon, and Sarah for joining us tonight, for your wisdom and experience and enthusiasm for the subject. I'm feeling more reassured and inspired. I hope others are too. I'd just like to acknowledge all the amazing people we have had in the room with us tonight. There's such a wealth of knowledge in our community. We're keen to work with you. We will be sending out these links and some further information. So please feel free to reach out. And if there's any questions we didn't get to, we'll try our best to answer online as well and in the days coming. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for your time and your attention. And let's work together to save our beautiful koala in South East Queensland and beyond. Thanks so much.
Thanks,